Got to get as much light in here as possible. Kathy can tell you I don't like darkness. I'm always turning the lights off, especially where I am, because I like a very bright room. And as I was thinking about the theme a couple of weeks ago, today, Face the Darkness, I didn't like the theme at all, and I looked at the scriptures. It didn't say anything recommended, didn't say anything about darkness. I couldn't figure out what is this theme trying to speak to us today about. And so I said, well, maybe we can, at church we can turn off all the lights in the sanctuary, and I can light this candle and show you the power of light in darkness. Well, Tara in her children's ministry last week did pretty much the same thing, and Mike did it already this morning, so I'll spare you the third time. We've already had enough darkness. So, but I will tell you a story that the Jewish rabbis tell. It's about a farmer who had 3 sons, and some of you probably heard this story before. The farmer had 3 sons, and he was trying to decide which one would get the farm when he died. So he said, I have a contest for you. So told his son, I have a contest for you. He said, whichever one can fill up this barn to the fullest will inherit the farm. So the first son came forward, and he said, well, the animals are the most prized possession of the farm here, so I'll fill up the barn with animals. So he did. He filled up the barn with animals, but there were still open spaces and there were still dark spots. The second son said, well, I can fill the barn up with hay or straw to the top. And so he filled up the barn to the top with hay and straw, but the farmer noticed that there were still open spaces. So the third son went to the barn, and he lit a candle. He took that in the barn, and it filled up the whole room. Even the cracks and the crevices were filled up, and he inherited the farm. That shows the power of light in darkness. The Jews celebrate Hanukkah in December about the same time we celebrate Christmas. And Hanukkah is sometimes called the Festival of Lights. Have you heard that? Festival of Lights. Because that's the darkest time of the year. You remember, I think December 22nd might be the shortest day of the year. And around here it's usually dark, and it stays dark usually for the next couple of months. But that's when they celebrate Hanukkah. And that's about the same time that we celebrate Christmas, the coming of Jesus' birth, because Jesus was a light to the world. Jesus came not only a time of darkness in the year, but he also came at a time of darkness in the history of the Jewish people, because they were being persecuted severely by the Romans, by their kings. Some of them were Jews, but they were persecuted, were puppets of the Romans, but they were persecuted on a daily basis, and they were looking for a Messiah, a Savior. And when Jesus came, they thought he was claiming to be the Messiah or Savior that would save them from the Jews, but Jesus came to do much more for them than that. They never realized it at the time, but he came to do much more than that for them. You know, being in darkness is a very scary thing. I can remember, when I was younger, a teenager, I used to love to hunt, still do, small game and deer. And I can remember as a young teenager, I never had a driver's license. So my mother, I asked my mom, I said, can you take me out to the country so I can hunt? And I'd go to the Wayne National Forest. It's the largest forest in Ohio, and sometimes you can walk 20 miles without hitting a road or anything. So it's very easy to get lost, so you had to pay close attention. When you went hunting, you had to mark your way or mark your spot or mark your path so you'd know the way out. Well, Mom took me out after school one evening, and she'd always pick me up at the same place at dark. So I got out of the car, went hunting, and got in a chase for an animal, and I lost my way. Well, in the process, it started raining, and it became very cloudy, and it started raining. And I don't know whether you've ever been in the country when it's raining and cloudy. You can't see anything. Anyone ever had that experience? You cannot see anything. You can't even see the hand in front of your face. And so I got lost. And so Mom came to pick me up. She noticed I wasn't there. She hollered for me. And I could hear her, but her voice echoed from one hill to the other to the other. And when she was hollering, I'd go to the place I thought the voice was coming from, and she'd holler again, and here was this over here. And then it was behind me. I couldn't figure out where her voice was coming from. And it's kind of like the world. We hear a lot of voices. There's a lot of options in our world today. We hear a lot of voices in the world. And that's the way I felt then. I ran into trees. I started hearing the nocturnal animals came out and started making some weird sounds I'd never heard before in the woods. So I became scared, and I started to run. I'd run into trees. And the only thing I knew, I could tell whether I was going downhill or uphill or sideways. So I decided I'll go to the top of the hill to see if I can see anything. So I went to the top of the hill, and I looked out, and I saw a cloud that was lit, a little bit of light in the cloud. So I followed that light, and eventually, and I didn't realize it at the time, it was my mother's headlights. She'd turn on the headlights of the car, and it was reflecting on the clouds. I followed that light back to the car. Shows the power of light in darkness. One statement I heard about the darkness is that we all have cracks and crevices in our life, just like the barn have cracks and crevices in our life. We all have flaws, and most of us are aware of our flaws. But Jesus came to fill those cracks and crevices of light, the power of light in darkness. Jesus said, "I am the light." He also said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." We've just sung about the voice of truth. The voice of truth is the voice of light. The way is the light of Jesus. It's Jesus. If we want to know the way, we look to Jesus. If we want to know the truth, we look to Jesus. If we want to know the life, we look to Jesus. When we are facing darkness, it's a great source of comfort to know that we have a light available to us. Just like Mike said, we turn it, as Susie told him, we turn it over to God, we turn everything over to Jesus and let him control things. He is a source of light and the source of comfort. And this is what Jesus, but we're called sometimes to face the darkness. No matter how much we don't like it, we're called to face the darkness. And that is precisely what Jesus did. He came to the Jewish people in a difficult time in their life, a time of darkness in their history. But he came to them at the time of darkness. Jesus went into cities and neighborhoods which were tough. He went to Samaria. Samaria was known as a rough and tough neighborhood. He went close to Samaria and a place where the lepers were kept. And the lepers lived there, and 10 lepers came to him and asked Jesus to heal them, and he did. He did not walk away like everyone else. He healed them all, and this is the time that he noted only one came back. Remember the story, only one came back to thank him. One came back to worship him. He came upon men getting ready to stone an adulteress, a tough situation. The men had the rocks ready to stone a woman caught in adultery. And he asked them, he said, "I do not judge." He said, "Whoever is without guilt, cast the first stone." And they walked away. He invited the tax collector, Zacchaeus, to come down from a tree and eat with him. Everyone else didn't like tax collectors. They didn't like Zacchaeus. But he asked Zacchaeus to come down and eat with him. When the little children approached him, he said, "Come forward to him." Although the disciples rebuked the children, he asked them to come forth, and he blessed them. We used to have some of you remember Tom Mountain, who was a regional administrator quite a few years ago. And I've heard him tell the story about Jesus and the little children. He said in those days, he said people were very poor, and sometimes they just put their kids out on the street to fend for themselves. He said this might have been what happened when Jesus came to little children. He said people didn't want that much to do with the little children. It's kind of how we might treat feral cats today. They're on their own pretty much. Some people feed them, some don't. But he said that he thought maybe the children that came to Jesus were like these feral cats that not many people wanted to be around. The disciples rebuked the children, but Jesus accepted them, he blessed them, and he said, "Of such is the kingdom of God." He healed people on the Sabbath, which was breaking a tradition of the Jews. But he healed people. He did things that Rachel calls it a paradigm shift. When Jesus came, it was a great paradigm shift. He caused people to look at things in a different manner. He did not shy away from the darkness. He didn't shy away from the darkness in people's lives. He said, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid, cannot hide. No one, after lighting a lamp, will put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it will give light to all the house. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." To let our light shine the brightest, we go to the darkest places. In the adult class, we've been studying the book, just started studying the book this month, "You Were Born for This," by Bruce Wilkinson. And Bruce Wilkinson talks basically about being a light in darkness, going into the darkness of people's lives, people that need Jesus, and to bring ministry to them, to bring God's love to them. He calls it miracles. We're called to do miracles. Not just most of us can talk about miracles, maybe where it's happened once or twice in our lives. Something has happened once or twice, and we talk about it forever. He said, you actually can be a part of God's work, these supernatural powers, on a daily basis. On a daily basis. Others might be more comfortable with the word coincidences or God incidences. But whatever you call them, they're extraordinary acts of God who use people, which are use people to minister other people in need or people in darkness. And he talks about 4 steps of being a delivery agent. We're merely a delivery agent, not the person who performs the miracle. God performs the miracle, but God is looking for delivery agents, people who are willing to deliver these miracles to other people in need. He talks about 4 keys. He said the first key is called the master key. And the master key, he talks about being intentional. We have to start the day off by being very intentional. God, what do you want me to do today? God, please lead me today. And in our church, we have what we call the mission prayer, which I carry in my pocket. And the mission prayer, and we have some of these in the back on the card rack. It says, God, where will your Spirit lead me today? Help me be fully awake and ready to respond. Grant me the courage to risk something new and become a blessing of your love and peace. Amen. Might add, be a blessing of your love to other people to that. But this is called the first key, is called the master key. The second key is the people key. We have to be sensitive to people and sensitive to their needs. I confess I'm not near sensitive as a lot of people in our congregation to people's needs. I'm just not. And one of the things, if you're a busy person, it's hard to be sensitive to other people. If you've got things planned for the day, and most of us do, it's hard to be as sensitive as we should be. But the second key is a people key, paying attention to other people and being sensitive to other people's needs. The third key is the Spirit key, being sensitive to God's Spirit and allow God's Spirit to work through me and through you. Being sensitive, and you get nudges during the time when we talked about that in class this morning. We get nudges. Sometimes we pay attention, sometimes we don't. And the fourth is a risk key. There's always a risk involved. There's always a risk involved. We have to take the risk in order to deliver this God incidence or this miracle. The 4 keys of being intentional, of intentionally delivering God's word and his love to other people. I'd like to, and we studied the book 7 or 8 years ago in adult class, and I'm not as intentional as I should be. I'm not as sensitive as I should be, but I've had a few experiences where I would consider them, myself, I would consider them God answers or miracles. I'd like to tell you about one of them. A few months ago, I'd planned on going to a funeral home to see Mike's brother Harold had died, and his funeral home was in Millersport. And it came to my mind, so maybe Bernie would like to go too, and I could call Bernie and we could ride out together. So I called Bernie, and he said he'd like to go, and we rode up together. We had dinner together, and then we went to the funeral home and was on our way home. And in the process, Bernie was talking about his house and how it was difficult for him to keep up with the maintenance on his house, and becoming more and more difficult because of his shoulders. He couldn't do a lot of the work that was required because of surgeries he had in his shoulder. So I got a nudge to ask Bernie if I could look for him a place in a senior citizens facility. And I didn't really want to, because I thought, man, I've been working with I'm the oldest of 5, and my sisters and brother and I have been working with my mom for 5 years, trying to get her to get into a facility which would care for her and provide her needs. And I get down, and she's heavily dependent on my sisters every day for getting her prescriptions, taking her medicine, making sure she takes her medicine, and she depends on them every day for just about everything. She lives in a home, a big home, which is too much for her, and she realizes that. It's too much for her to take care of. And she does have housekeepers that come in and take care of it. But if you get down, I mentioned, and my sisters have worked with her a lot, and they've taken her places, trying to find a place for her. And so I said, Mom, would you like for me to help you find a place? We can go looking for a place for you to live. She said, no. She said, I've told everyone, I'll tell you the same thing I've told the rest of them. She'll be 90 years old in a few weeks. I'll tell you the same thing I've told them. She said, when it's time for me to go to a nursing home, she said, I will know. She said, I know everything about all the nursing homes, which she doesn't. She said, I know everything about every senior facility in the whole area here. And I happened to mention one. She said, well, I don't know about that one, but she thinks she does. And so I said, man, so when I got that nudge to ask Bernie, I fought it off the first time. Then I got it the second time. So just ask Bernie if you'd like to help him find a senior citizens place. And so I acted on it. I asked Bernie the question. I knew he was going to say no, because about everyone else I'd ever asked had said that. And I had some experience with nursing homes, a lot of friends that have family in nursing homes and people. I helped build Restoration Plaza. I was in on the second phase of Restoration Plaza, and we toured a lot of nursing homes, independent living facilities. And so I had some experience. I had a little bit of knowledge about that. And one thing I did find out when we were studying this book, the Lord will work with you in ways that you can help people. And it's not that difficult, really, but you have to be able to risk. And so I had some experiences with the senior living facilities, toured a lot of them, visited people in a lot of them. So when I asked Bernie the question, I was expecting no, something like I always got from Mom, and he said yes. I said, now what do I do? So it took me a few minutes to compose myself, and I said, well, Bernie, where would you like to live? He said, well, I'd like to live closer to church. So I'd like to live closer to church and like to live independently. And so I started checking around. I said, I'll see what I can find. I started checking around. There's really only one that was closer to our church than Bernie's house. And there was only one there, and I checked on the ratings. They were ranked out of like 180 some senior citizens facilities in Franklin County. They were ranked in the top 25%, which I think is really good. And I called Donna. Remember, I called Donna. Her dad had lived there, and I think he was in assisted care, fully assisted care for quite a while. And she said their experience was good there. I called Sharon, and Fred was there for rehab. She said, yeah, they had a good experience there, and they were happy with it. So I felt comfortable in recommending it to Bernie. So I called Bernie, and I said, would you like to go check this place out? And he said, yeah, I would. And so Bernie and I went and met with the manager. She first went over all the financial requirements of living there, and which happened to fit Bernie's budget almost perfectly, which I was amazed that Bernie's budget was almost exactly the same as my mom's. We talk about the financial situation. But it worked out, and then she took us around to see the villas. They're independent. They're like condos, independent little homes. And Bernie and I walked in, and as soon as we walked in, you remember we looked at each other, Bernie? We looked at each other, we couldn't believe how nice those villas were. I mean, they were very modern, cathedral ceilings. I said, man, I wouldn't mind living here. This is nicer than most of our homes. It really was. If you've been there, you'd see it's really nice. And so Bernie agreed and thought about it for a while. Eventually, to make a long story short, Bernie did decide to sell his house and move there. And I know he's had a lot of help from people in our congregation. I know I went over a few times cleaning out the house. I know Mike's was there quite a bit. They had a garage sale. I went over. I think Julia was over there at the time helping with the garage sale. I think Sandy helped. I don't know. There's probably other people here that helped too. I don't want to leave anybody out, but other people helped Bernie at the time. He got a lot of help from people in our congregation. I think Mike, I think James other people might have helped move Bernie from his house to his new home. And so he received a lot of help, a lot of support from the congregation. And Fanny decorated his new villa, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And one of the most interesting things about it, and I tell you about. I think I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. But it's just a beautiful place, and I think that we all felt the Holy Spirit working through us to help Bernie to get into the senior facility that could offer him the advantages of senior care and still have independent living. But I think that's not the end of the story. I think there's another story within that story, because Bernie has been a key member of our congregation for many years. And the last few months I've been working on updating the history of our congregation, the events of the past 50 years. And I didn't realize it hadn't been done, or at least we can't find any records. The World Church can't find any records since like 1979. So I'm trying to update the history of our congregation. And as I was doing that, getting a lot, if you have any information, things have gone on, pictures or anything, celebrations of the last 50 years, I'd be glad to receive those. But our congregation has a very, very rich history, And God has been through us over 100 years. The congregation has been meeting on and off for over 100 years. And two of the key leaders for many decades of our church was first the Neiman family and then the Madden family. Some of you probably have never even heard of those names, because they've been gone for a while now. I'll show you pictures. Maybe the two key figures, not only in our congregation, but the whole Upper Ohio Valley region congregation, two of the key figures, and maybe the most key figures, have been Bob and Lucinda Madden. Here's a picture of Bob and Lucinda. How many people remember Bob and Lucinda? Quite a few here today remember Bob and Lucinda. And here's a picture of Lucinda. She was actually on the front page of the Herald in 1986. And they had a story about her, and one of her favorite, she was quoted in that story, but one of her favorite sayings is, there's no gender of the mind. She was a female attorney. She became an attorney in like the 1920s, 100 years ago, when there were very few female attorneys around. She was a female attorney. She always said, there's no gender of the mind. But anyway, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about Bob and Lucinda. Lucinda's parents were named Neiman. August Neiman was her dad's name, and her mom's name was Rosa. And they had a little store, I think it was a variety store, a general store in Columbus. And Joe's probably one that remembers, he might have even remembered them. He remembers them. That was Lucinda's mom and dad. They actually mortgaged their home. They mortgaged their home so the church could be built, to buy the property for the church. And then another person, his name was Byerly, a carpenter, built the church at no cost. The church just supplied the materials, and he built the church at no cost. But Lucinda was very young at the time when the church was built. She was born in 1899, and she became a lawyer, I think, about 1929. And Bob, she met Bob youth activities at the church. And he went to Ohio State. He ran track at Ohio State. He graduated from Ohio State in engineering. He was a professional engineer. He actually worked on the Hoover Dam project. Bob had many opportunities for advancement. He told me one time, he said, I've had many opportunities for advancement but I'm a leader at the church, and I take that more serious. So he passed up many opportunities for advancement in his career to serve the Lord and to serve the church. He was pastor for 14 straight years, from 1930 to 1943. 14 straight years he was pastor. And that was during the Depression and during the war. And I know the church depended heavily upon Bob and Lucinda for financial support during those times. Bob, he was a meticulous record keeper, and he handed me his records one time. He was ordained, I think he was ordained in 1929 or 1930, and he became pastor at the time. Pastored until 1943. He kept records until 1983. He passed away in 84. But he kept records of everything that he did over those 53 years. And I've got, he has like 24 columns of different things. At that time, they consecrated oil and gave it to people. It's a practice not used anymore. He'd consecrate like 430-some bottles of oil. I remember doing it a couple times in my earlier years of ministry. But he also, he performed 83 weddings, officiated at 82 funerals, had over 4,000 priesthood visits to people who were sick, and about 2,000 administrations to people. And this is just the beginning of some of the things. He had 24 columns of things that he did, and he kept records of everything. Lucinda was the organist. She was a choir director and Sunday school teacher for many years, and she mentored a lot when I was younger. I know Bob and Lucinda both mentored me and gave me a lot of guidance. And Lucinda wasn't any problem for her to give guidance. If you needed guidance how to raise children, they didn't have any of their own. The church people were their children, but she could give you guidance on anything, and she didn't hesitate. But I always took it well. I enjoyed her constructive criticism. Stan Hunt used to have a saying, he said, there's no such thing as constructive criticism. Well, Lucinda offered a lot of constructive criticism to people, but she could get away with it. She really could, because we knew that she loved her. She loved us. But Bob and Lucinda were also chief supporters of Camp Bountiful. I don't think Camp Bountiful would ever have gotten off the ground if it weren't for Bob and Lucinda's financial contributions. Would you agree, Joe, I know Camp Bountiful recognized them in the 80s. They got a letter from Camp Bountiful. They recognized them one of the Camp Bountiful days, that they had been very instrumental in getting Camp Bountiful off the ground. Bob even designed the Camp Bountiful logo and was recognized for that. They were benefactors of Graceland College, and I know the World Church depended heavily upon them for financial contributions. In fact, Lucinda would go to World Conference, and she sat usually near the front. She would be knitting the whole time during the service, and it was 6,000 people. It's hard to get the floor at World Conference. Well, Lucinda didn't even get out of her seat. She'd raise her hand. Whatever they were doing, they interrupted. Yes, Lucinda, do you have something to say? So she had a voice at World Conference, and they recognized her. And the president of the church used to come through Columbus and stay at their house. But they're also involved in local activities. I think one year Lucinda was Woman of the Year at the YWCA. They were heavy supporters of the YWCA and the YMCA. And so when Bernie, get back to Bernie here, when Bernie started coming to our congregation, it was a dark time in his life. Would you say that, Bernie, when he started attending our congregation? He was going through a divorce, and he just told me a couple weeks ago, at that time, he said, I just wanted out. He said, I give my wife everything. He said, I had nothing. He said, I didn't even have a car. He said, I was broke, didn't have a car, but Bernie had good credit. He'd worked on his job for like 40 years. He had a good job and good credit. So he was able, after Lucinda died in 92, a dark period in our congregation's life, Bernie was able to buy their house. And it was instrumental in our congregation, because one of the reasons we sold our church, because it wasn't safe to go to church. People didn't feel safe going to that neighborhood, and especially at night. So we began meeting on Wednesday nights, prayer service. I think we did, after we sold the church and met in the school, we still met at Bernie's home for prayer service on Wednesday night for quite a few, I think 4, 5, 6 years we met at Bernie's house. Bernie was very generous with his home, which used to be Bob and Lucinda's home. He also, we had, as we planned to build our new church, we had like 69 meetings, planning meetings for the new church. And a lot of those meetings were in Bernie's home. I remember going to Bernie's home many times to have those planning meetings. And also, Bernie allowed us to store everything from the old church. When we had the pipe organ we took with us, stored it in the basement. All the equipment we had in the old church we took, the choir, everything that we took, a lot of it's still here with us. We took to Bernie's home. We even took the signs from the church, and they were down there. The stained glass was in Bernie's basement. In fact, the stained glass now and some of the signs are in Bernie's backyard outside. So if you want to see the church signs, so go visit Bernie. He'd be happy to show you. But they're in Bernie's backyard. But I've always said that God takes care of those who takes care of his children. God takes care of those who take care of his children. And so I think God has taken care of Bernie because he helped take care of us during a critical time, a time of darkness in our church's life. This past week, I officiated at Ricky Patterson's funeral. Ricky is Eleanor Bear's brother. Ricky had Down syndrome, and contrary to the things of that time, when Ricky was born, a lot of people committed children with Down syndrome to an institution. I can remember playing ball in Gallipolis one time, and it was flooded. The baseball field was flooded, and we went up on the hill at the institution to play ball. And I was playing the outfield, and the bell rang, and about 40, 50, 60 kids with Down syndrome come out of the building and flooded the field. And but that's what happened. Kids with Down syndrome back then, most of them were institutionalized. And so one of Ricky's cousins wrote a letter. She couldn't attend. A couple cousins wrote letters, and one of them said, I can remember when Ricky was born, and Ricky's mom and dad decided to keep Ricky in the home rather than commit him to an institution. They involved him in all of the activities. And I can remember I officiated at Eleanor's mom's and her dad's funeral, and I remember her mom's funeral, and it was maybe one of the saddest things I've ever experienced was Ricky's mom died. It was really a tough situation, a dark time for Ricky, for the family. But the family took over. Eleanor and her sister and brother took over. And I know Eleanor and Chuck loved Ricky. He was the center of attention everywhere he went. I remember them they came to our house, bringing him out to our house and playing. Ricky wanted to play basketball. Ricky had a different way of playing basketball than most. He played it like the little kids. He'd get out there and they'd shoot the ball. Said, you go get it. You get the ball. Now it's my turn again. Shoot the ball. Go get the ball. That was Ricky's way of playing basketball, but he loved playing basketball. I would too if that's all that was to it. But Ricky, pretty much, I think they spoiled Ricky pretty good, as good as they could. But they were very, very good to Ricky. And the cousin said they always involved him in all the family activities. And I think a lot of the activities, Ricky was really the center of attention. And so it just come to me that day, the Spirit nudged me to tell them that Ricky was a special person. He was a special person. He was a light to the family, and they loved him, and they were a light to the world because they loved Ricky. They involved him in all of their activities. They weren't, Chuck and Eleanor especially, were not ashamed of Ricky. They took him places that they went, so they were a light to the world. And as I told them at the funeral and today, that God has a special place in heaven for special needs people. Special place in heaven, and God has a special place in heaven for those who take care of the people with special needs, for those who take care of people in needs. We're not called to be reservoirs. We're not called to be reservoirs where everything's stored up within us. We receive everything. We're called to be a river. We're called to allow God's love and His Spirit to flow through us. And if we're sensitive to the nudges of the Holy Spirit and willing to respond and risk, God will respond to us, and we can be ministers to people in darkness. So as we face the darkness, it's important to know, as Susie told Mike, If you take the light with you, we always have the light to take with us. We take the light with us, God's Spirit will be with us. Thank you.